2023 and 2024 players in one mock draft. Today, we're going to be breaking down a 2-round rookie mock with both 2023 prospects and 2024 prospects mixed in so that you guys can get an idea. Hey, I'm picking at 108. Is, a mid first in 2024 enough to move off of that pick? Do we want to be buying into 2024 picks in general? And how does next year's class stack up versus this year's class? We did this exercise last year and obviously got some things wrong. So we're going to try and be a little bit more well-informed, a little bit less rosy, glasses looking into the future, a little bit more, matter of fact this year. So this one should be a fun exercise and I think it should be pretty informative as well. But before we get into it, Danny, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And yeah, we did a lot of work over the 2023 cycle, but now let's gear in. Now let's combine the classes like Corey said, and let's look at these two classes combined. I'm fired up and ready to go. But with that being said, let's get right into it.
All right, so if you skip the intro, we are basically combined mock drafts 2023, 2024. We are going to go back and forth. Danny's going to pick 101. I'm going to go 102 and then, alternate every other pick. And we're just going to keep, rattling this off. Superflex style, as always, we do usually play in Superflex leagues. You are on the board with 101. Are you going to go with 2023's 101 or are you going to go with the projected 101 in 2024?
And this pick is very easy for me. Listen, I love Bijan, the prospect. I love that he went top 10. I love his profile as a workhorse running back coming into the league. But the 101 is Caleb Williams. The 101, the reason why it's Caleb Williams, because Caleb Williams, upon being drafted first overall, which is already inevitable at this point, I do think that even if he missed time this year, even if he didn't have as good of a 2023 season, given what he was able to showcase in 21 and 22, I think he's the unanimous number one overall pick. I mean, this is a guy that's getting comps to Patrick Mahomes, and I would not be shocked if as soon as he came into the NFL, as soon as he was drafted into startups next year, this is a legitimate top 6, top 8 overall pick in startups. The outer structure ability, the arm talent, the mobility, everything that you look for from a superstar caliber quarterback prospect, Caleb Williams has in space. I mean, we're looking at the next Trevor Lawrence of quarterback prospects coming into the NFL, and any team picking at 101 this year is going to have the luxury of taking this guy and adding them to their teams, and therefore you should be doing that on yours as well, especially in Superflex.
Yeah, I mean, he obviously broke onto the scene at Oklahoma as a freshman. Then he transfers to USC as a sophomore. 42-5 touchdown interception ratio, 6th highest PFF passing grade, 10th highest PFF rushing grade at the quarterback position as well, 624 yards and 10 rushing touchdowns. He's not the size profile that Trevor Lawrence was. He's only 6'1", 215 pounds, give or take, but he does have, a great arm. That's where the Mahomes comparison's coming from, the out of structure plays, the off-platform throws, that kind of stuff. And it's going to be very exciting for NFL GMs. And this guy will be, similarly valued right now to a guy like Justin Fields, who we already know can provide us fantasy production, who's already a top 10, Dynasty Superflex startup pick. That's about, if you guaranteed me that this, 2024 first that I'm acquiring is the 101 next year, that's about where Caleb Williams is being valued.
Yep. No, I absolutely agree. And I mean, I think you can argue him, like we kind of mentioned, as soon as he gets drafted, we're looking at a 21, 22-year-old franchise signal caller with the pedigree that he has. Like I kind of said, you mentioned Justin Fields being the area at the 109, 110 spot in startup drafts. I wouldn't even be shocked if he was kind of in that Herbert, Trevor Lawrence, Lamar Jackson area due to people, weighing the proven production of those guys versus the age and the unlimited ceiling that Caleb represents. So either way you slice it, his value right now with what we can project is going to be higher than what we could see from Bijan. And that's just going to be the nature of the position of playing quarterback versus running back.
Yeah, for sure. And that's why you would take him 101 in a combined draft over Bijan, who I am going to take here at 102, because I do believe, he'd be the 101 in like 90% of classes outside of classes that have, an elite level quarterback prospect like Caleb Williams. We've gone in depth on Bijan Robinson and the 2023 prospects in general that we talk about in this video. We're kind of just going to skim over them. Obviously, top 10 draft capital, run heavy offense, transcendent running back talent who has receiving ability. There's not much else I need to say about Bijan Robinson that you guys don't already know. So let's kick it to you at 103. Are you going to go with the quarterback 1 in this class? Are you going to go with the potential quarterback 2 in next year's class?
I'm going to take the quarterback 2 in next year's class. And maybe this is a hot take because we already know kind of what Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson represent, but I'm going to trust the evaluation. I'm going to go with Drake May. This is a guy that's getting comparisons. I mean, we mentioned Caleb Williams getting the Patrick Mahomes comps due to his out of structure play on the run, being able to make these ridiculous throws into tight windows. Well, Drake May is getting comps to Justin Herbert. And I know you're going to get into it in a second as well. But from an arm talent standpoint, from a mobility standpoint, a processing standpoint, this guy was also one of the most accurate quarterbacks that we have seen in his first year starting at UNC. Keep in mind, 2 years ago, Sam Howell was the starter there. He comes in second year, obviously redshirted as a freshman, comes in last year with Howell leaving, and has one of the best opening seasons we have seen. I think that no matter what, like we kind of mentioned with Caleb, this guy's going to be a top 5 pick in next year's draft. We already saw the sample size. We already see the youth kind of figuring it out on the spot from him. And like we kind of mentioned in terms of the tools, every one of them is there. So, like I kind of said with Caleb, we can project him to be a top 6 or top 8 overall startup pick. With Drake May, I think his floor will be about where, Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, CJ Stroud are going right now in that, mid to back end second round range. But I would not be shocked if Drake May was a back end first, early second round pick this time next year. And as a result, I'm going to have him in terms of valuation ahead of this year's quarterback group.
Yeah, future Tampa Bay Buccaneer, Drake May. I don't think we're going to be bad enough to get Caleb Williams. I think Arizona's probably going to get him, but we might get him as a consolation prize. He was actually third in the NCAA and PFF passing grade ahead of Caleb Williams. I would argue that his tools are better than Caleb Williams, even though Caleb has the arm elasticity of a Patrick Mahomes. Drake is 6'5", 215 pounds, has a stronger arm, big time throw rate of 8.4% last year, which was fourth in the NCAA, 37 to 7 touchdown to interception ratio, also rushed for 900 yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground. I think he still has a case to be quarterback one in next year's class, legitimately over Caleb Williams because of that rushing upside. We kind of talked about the Herbert comparisons. I think he actually might be more athletic than Herbert, which is saying a lot because Herbert is a great athlete. And if you guys want to know where we're pulling all these stats and metrics from, I wrote an article on flockfantasy.com about a month ago talking about my top 24 rankings for superflex leagues in the 2024 class. And of course, if you want access to that, go to flockfantasy.com and use the promo code FSE, sign up for a 2-day free trial, and you can read that article and get 30% off any of the packages. Do you want to move on to the 104 or you got something else?
Just wanted to say one more thing. A little joke, but shout out to the strong bloodlines over there at UNC. Brother Luke May, one of the true heroes of UNC basketball. So all jokes aside, the athletic gene runs in the family.
Yeah, for sure. So let's 104 move on to, I think, a guy that should definitely be in the conversation. There's probably a shot of 3 players here. It's either the 2 quarterbacks from this year's class with Bryce Young and Anthony Richardson, or Marvin Harrison Jr., wide receiver from Ohio State, who is the transcendent next, Jamar Chase prospect there at Ohio State. I'm going to go with Bryce Young because just given positional value in superflex leagues, Bryce Young, I believe, was a great, excellent, elite, potentially superstar level quarterback prospect. If he had the size, he'd be, right up there with Caleb and Drake as the top quarterbacks of the next 2 years. But because of the size, you down tick him a little bit. But either way, Bryce Young would be my pick here at 104. Out of structure plays. Again, we've well documented what Bryce Young's game is now. First overall draft capital of the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you there. You mentioned if this guy was legitimately, 6'1", 6'2", 6'3", he would be up there with like a Joe Burrow in terms of a prospect. So yeah, the outer structure ability is out there of the wazoo. Being able to, really threaten defenses down the field is one of his bread and butters. Extending plays, getting the ball down the field, accurate throws. Everything you want to see from a quarterback prospect, Bryce Young has in spades. So I do think that he is the pretty clear 104 for me as well. 105, I think it's really a toss-up. It depends. You want to take the number 3 overall player from next year's class? You want to take the second quarterback from this year's class? I do go back and forth with it, and you guys will see the next one is just going to go off the board in a second. But I'll take Marvin Harrison Jr., a wide receiver from Ohio State. Hurts me to say this, obviously, as a Michigan Wolverine Go Blue fan, but I mean, this guy is the Jamar Chase when it comes to wide receiver prospects. We're looking at a 6'3", 205-pound absolute monster outside wide receiver. I mean, we're looking at a guy that in his first full season starting, obviously had that bowl game where he showed out last year when Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave obviously skipped for the NFL draft. But in his first year starting, we're looking at a wide receiver who posted an 89.9 PFF receiving grade, which was 3rd in the NCAA and 1st in the Power 5. And ultimately on a team where he had Emeka Egbuka, where he had, albeit he was injured, Travion Henderson, other NFL caliber weapons on this offense, was still able to produce on 118 targets, 77 receptions, nearly 1,300 receiving yards, and 14 touchdowns on a 29% target share. If he runs, 4.4, 4.5 in the NFL draft next year, I would not be shocked if this was a legitimate top 5 NFL draft pick. And I wouldn't be shocked if the Dynasty community has this guy as a top 5 wide receiver in Dynasty as soon as he's drafted to the NFL.
I wouldn't be shocked if the NFL took this player second overall in the NFL draft. If Arizona has both of the first two picks and they wanted to pair Caleb with Marvin Harrison, I wouldn't be shocked. I think there's no way this guy gets outside the top 5 to 10 players in the NFL draft next year. He's pretty much locked into high-end draft capital, even if he has what happened to JSN this past year as an injury-riddled, junior season or whatever. If he doesn't get injured against Georgia, that game might have ended differently. Like they might have actually won that game. Stroud played well enough to win that game, and Marvin Harrison was torching them before he got injured, I believe in the second quarter or third quarter or whatever it was in that game. So yeah, Harrison's a viable pick there at 105. I'm just going to go with the other guy that we were deciding between with 106, Anthony Richardson, quarterback of the Indianapolis Colts now, 4th overall draft capital, superstar, best athlete in combine history at the quarterback position. Again, you probably could have argued him higher than this, just given the fantasy upside. But because of those well-known studs, I'm going to favor their college production, their college profiles over Anthony Richardson, who does have some development to do, but I do think he would still be warranted to go as high as 102, 103, 104 in this draft.
And for the record, if somebody's commenting, oh, how is Anthony Richardson not like the consensus 103 in this draft? For the record, all the 6 guys we just mentioned are guys we're projecting to be top 20 level startup picks for this time in 2024. Him being at 6 is no slight to Anthony Richardson himself. That just kind of goes to show you how elite of a crop we have amongst the top of 2023 and 2024 drafts. But like you mentioned with Anthony Richardson, athleticism out of the wazoo, prototypical size, Cam Newton level upside, Justin Fields level upside if he is to hit his ceiling. And like we've kind of talked about from a dynasty perspective, from a 2023 rookie draft perspective, him landing over there in Indianapolis with Shane Steichen calling the shots was the perfect case for his development. So like we kind of mentioned, 106 is probably the lowest you will see in terms of Anthony Richardson being on this list, but validly so. This top 6 is absolutely dynamite, absolutely bulletproof as prospects.
Yeah, and if you break it down, we have 3 prospects from this year and 3 prospects from next year. So if you're wondering, like, hey, I have the 102 and I'm getting offered an early first next year, while I would say that Caleb and Drake would be quarterback 1 and 2 in this class if they were in it, and Marvin Harrison absolutely would be wide receiver 1 in this class if he was in it, it's not as simple as saying, oh, next year's class is just so much better, because these guys this year are also extremely valuable in the dynasty landscape. And we can get into the 107 right now, which is the quarterback 3 in this year's class consensus wise.
Yeah, 100%. Next pick is going to be CJ Stroud from the Houston Texans. Oddly enough, I mean, the amount of Ohio State guys we're going to be talking about on today's video is going to make me vomit. But all jokes aside, I mean, this is the 2nd overall pick, goes to the Houston Texans. Obviously, we expect them to be able to build around this franchise quarterback. And this was a guy that was very efficient back in college. I mean, we're looking at from a PFF passing perspective, from leading Ohio State to the semifinal this past year, going toe-to-toe with a Georgia team that ended up winning the national championship by a score of 65-7. That just kind of goes to show you the amount of talent that Ohio State was working with. And when it comes to CJ Stroud, the architect of it all, this is if he hits a ceiling, a Dak Prescott level player, where we've seen Dak threatened as a top 5 overall quarterback in fantasy, but for a nice baseline, he's still that quarterback 5 to 10 range consistently every single year. I think CJ Stroud, if he hits his upper percentile, can be like Dak. And maybe if he is able to develop off the off-script ability that he showed against Georgia in that semifinal game, maybe it's closer to early career Dak, where he was rushing more and he had a higher fantasy ceiling as a result. But overall, like we kind of mentioned, if CJ Stroud is able to hit his ceiling as an NFL quarterback, we're looking at a consistent 35 passing touchdown guy. Maybe he flirts with, 200 or 300 rushing yards if that out of structure ability ends up developing. And for that type of ceiling, I mean, getting him at the 107 in the combined draft is obviously awesome. And this is a guy that has slipped in some rookie drafts. I can't boggle my mind around people letting CJ Stroud slip to the 106, 107, 108 in a 2023 draft, because like we kind of say here, he's the 107 across the next 2 drafts. Don't let this guy slip in your drafts. He's going to be a strong, at worst, quarterback 2 option on your dynasty team, which, like I said, if he hits the ceiling, could be a quarterback 1 acquired for the cost of a quarterback 2. So for me personally, CJ Stroud, love the pick. There's not really much else to add on him.
Yeah, for sure. And at 108 here, it all depends on philosophy here. When you're doing these combined draft classes, do we want to project forward into next year's running back class with Raheem Sanders, Travion Henderson, maybe the other wide receivers, Emeka Egbuka or Brock Bowers, the generational tight end prospect? for me, I look at Jahmyr Gibbs as a guy that's just a way safer projection because I got a guy that went 12th overall in the NFL draft who was an elite running back prospect in this year's class and has all the PPR upside in the world now, playing for an offense that scored top 5 points per game. Yeah, Raheem Sanders is intriguing because he has more of a prototypical build than Jahmyr Gibbs, and Brock Bowers is intriguing, and Mika Igbukwe are intriguing. But the peripherals of Jahmyr Gibbs to me outweigh the upside or the what if scenarios for those guys. Because I'm not sure Raheem Sanders is going to go in the first round of the NFL draft. I'm not sure Travion Henderson's going to go in the first round of the draft. I don't even know if Brock Bowers is worth selecting because he's a tight end at this point in time, even though from a talent standpoint, he probably is worth selecting. So I'm going to take Jahmyr Gibbs here. Again, you guys know our thoughts on him from like a 2023 prospect standpoint. So I'm not going to exhaust your ears on that. But I think Jahmyr Gibbs would still be a high-end pick. And when we look at the top 8 of these two combined draft classes, we have more 2023 players than 2024. As much as, the high-end talent is very, very high-end in 2024, don't forget about these 2023 prospects and don't just automatically look at next year's class with rose-colored glasses and realize that these guys are all, great projections as well.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. And I'm glad you mentioned that. When you're dealing with elite prospects, yeah, someone can argue, oh, if Travion Henderson puts it all together, he's a more complete projection than Jahmyr Gibbs. Or, oh, what about Raheem Sanders? He's like 6'2", 240, and he has a 3-down profile. I get that. The upside for either of those guys to be ranked ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs going into next year, I can see the case. But like you kind of said, we get this elite dynamic receiving prospect going at the 12th overall selection in the NFL draft, in a draft that people were wondering if Bijan would fall outside of the top 20. People were wondering if Jahmyr Gibbs would even be a first-round pick. Both those guys go inside the top 12 of the draft. For all we heard in the media of people devaluing the running back position, it seems like front offices, if the running back is special enough, is willing to take them high. And because we got that confirmation with Jahmyr Gibbs that he is a running back deemed special enough by the NFL to take not only in the first round, but in the top 12 of the draft, he has to be the pick over any of those guys. I think it's silly to argue otherwise.
Yeah, it's just the classic thing that we do every year where we get way too excited. And we did this last year. I mean, we took Kayshon Boutte in our draft last year over Drake London and Garrett Wilson. And I think Danny actually made that pick, and I probably would have taken Drake London, but I probably still would have said, the projection, the upside, and sometimes you get yourself into trouble with that. So as much as we like the 2024 class, don't forget about these 2023 guys. And I believe you're taking another one right here.
Yeah, absolutely. Next one's going to be Jackson Smith-Njigba, wide receiver, Seattle Seahawks, running the theme of a former Ohio State player in this regard. But, I mean, this was the Debbie Darling entering this season going into college football. People saw his finish to last year. People saw him sharing the field with Olave, with Garrett Wilson, producing, I think, 1,600 receiving yards last year. And they were automatically going to say, like, this is the prized possession of the 2023 draft. Obviously, 2023 deals with injuries, isn't being able to really like establish himself on the field. And as a result, I mean, Ohio State was able to develop Emeka Egbuka, who you'll talk about in a second, and Marvin Harrison Jr., who we've already talked about. That doesn't mean we should forget what Jackson Smith-Njigba represents when he is healthy, when he is right on the football field. This is a day one NFL slot that can command 100+ targets as a rookie. And I wouldn't be shocked if this was a Amon St. Brown type of projection where he's this dynamic, 130, 140 target munching slot wide receiver. But I do think his ceiling, given that yards after catch ability, can be on-esque of what CeeDee Lamb kind of represented going into this year, where he was playing primarily slot, but you saw the upside given the change of direction ability to be an outside wide receiver. Obviously, JSN, he's not going to be this, elite speed outside threat that's going to command targets on the third level of the defense consistently. But can he be like a CeeDee Lamb type where he's dominating the first two levels, where he has the yards after catch ability to be able to extend maybe, a 12-yard catch into a 20-yard catch consistently? I absolutely see that being the case when it comes to JSN.
Yeah, and I saw somebody tweet out that Tyler Lockett's actually outproduced DK Metcalf anytime they've been on the field together. And I think JSN being the target, option over the middle versus the guy that's like the deep threat red zone option definitely makes him. I'm not going to say target munching like Danny, but he's the guy that could command most of the targets. So don't forget about JSN. Don't think that, every receiver in next year's class, all the running backs in next year's class are going to outweigh him. If you're at 107 and somebody offers you like a mid first next year, definitely don't take that. Raheem Sanders is my next pick here, who is a 2024 prospect, the first one since the 105 when Marvin Harrison came off the board. He's, like Danny mentioned, a big running back who has a 3-down profile and also commanded like 31 targets last year, despite being 6'2", 237 pounds, ran in the low 4.5s coming out of high school. So he's a guy that has an extremely intriguing prospect profile if he can hit, his ceiling, workhorse RB1, similar to what we've seen, to a lesser extent than like what Bijan Robinson has become. And he could be a first round NFL draft pick if he hits his ceiling, but none of that's guaranteed, which is why I think, it's probably the safer bet to project him as like a day 2 running back. Could be, a Javonte Williams type of prospect, not necessarily a guy that's much, much better than that. And I think that's where he kind of slides into me. So if you guys are trading for mid first right now, hoping that you're going to get Raheem Sanders, A, he's probably going to be the consensus 104 in drafts if he hits anyway. And B, you don't want to just like sell the farm and sell some of these better 2023 and more sure thing 2023 prospects until we know kind of how this class plays out. And that's one thing that's kind of the theme in this video, is that we don't automatically want to assume every player in next year's class is going to be the best thing since sliced bread, because there is still avenues for Raheem Sanders to not hit. And I broke down, is the 2024 class overrated? If you search that video on this channel, I've tried to poke holes in all these prospects to make sure that we're not putting them on a pedestal and pretending that they're the best prospects ever, because they do have some flaws. In Raheem Sanders' case, he wasn't the most efficient runner of the ball, and we don't necessarily know how the NFL is going to view him quite yet as well. So he's my pick at 110. I'll throw it over to you for 111.
Yeah, 100%. And like you kind of mentioned, a similar upside case running back that does have his warts in his profile, Trayvon Henderson of course, Ohio State. It feels like I'm picking every single Ohio State guy right now, which makes me sick as a Michigan fan, like I said. But either way, Trayvon Henderson, obviously after his freshman season, this was a guy people put on a pedestal. This is a guy who people said was going to be the next Bijan Robinson level prospect. And validly so. If you're just looking at the numbers of his freshman season, 195 attempts, nearly 1,300 rushing yards, and 15 touchdowns on the ground, on top of 29 targets, which he converted into 27 receptions, 312 yards, and 4 touchdowns. This looked like, quite frankly, a better receiving ability version of what Bijan Robinson was coming into the year. Obviously, Bijan Robinson showed out in a big way, had by far one of the most efficient PFF seasons of all time this year, to kind of put that comparison at ease. But there was legitimate conversation coming into the year as to who was going to be the better prospect. Obviously, Trayvon Henderson this past year deals with some injuries. You don't really get that full sample size for him. So that is the risk of him at this point. But given the ceiling comp, he comes back this year and he looks every bit of that dynamic freshman self that he showed. I think it's a very similar case to what I think you're going to compare it to, what J.K. Dobbins represented when he was coming out of Ohio State.
Yeah, because Dobbins had a down sophomore year as well, and then rushed for like 2,000 yards as a junior and put those concerns to bed. I still can't believe that he wasn't a higher pick for most people. But yeah, he's also 5'10", 214 pounds, 4.45 running out of high school. So he's got the size, he's got the speed. Like you said, 6% target shares. That's a good number for a junior, let alone a freshman at Ohio State that usually doesn't even see the field at a school like that. Think of, Marvin Harrison didn't see the field as a freshman at Ohio State. Like, this is usually what happens at schools like this. And Trayvon Henderson not only started, but had a 6% target share, competing for targets with Jackson Smith-Njigba, Garrett Wilson, and Chris Olave, which is pretty insane. So he has a huge, huge ceiling. And I wouldn't be shocked if we look stupid for having him at 111, because he could absolutely be, the consensus 104 in next year's class, maybe even 103 in next year's class. And he might be on the level of like a B+ Bijan Robinson coming out of Ohio State. So yeah, he's definitely an interesting one to close out this first round, and then we'll kind of speed through the second round. So we're not keeping you guys too long. Is Jordan Addison, who obviously is the 107 in this year's class. For me, I just love the Minnesota Vikings landing spot so much, and I love that he got first round draft capital. Of course, sophomore Biletnikoff season. It's kind of the Jahmyr Gibbs situation. Yeah, I could have gone, Brock Bowers. I could have gone Emeka Egbuka, or could have gone with a different 2024 prospect projecting forward. But I got a guy that was extremely productive in college, got first round draft capital to a good landing spot. To me, that's a much safer projection than projecting the best case scenario for those other guys. And to me, I just can't pass on Addison at 112. So I'll throw it to you for the second round, and the guy that probably people are clamoring for being off the board at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, by the way, Jordan Addison probably would have been my pick as well. So I like that pick. Next pick I'm going to take, though, at 201 is going to be Brock Bowers, tight end of Georgia. Yes, the first tight end selected in this exercise. I guess people would make the case, what about Dalton Kincaid? What about Michael Mayer? The difference for Brock Bowers is this is a legitimate athlete at the tight end position. Like, we're looking at a guy that could quite literally threaten, mid 4.4 in terms of his combine speed. A guy who ran 4.48 coming out of high school, listed as 6'4", 230 pounds. And as soon as he stepped on the scene at Georgia, despite playing with Darnell Washington, Arik Gilbert, other NFL quality talent on that receiving corps, he's been by far their most used player from a volume standpoint in the receiving game. Third highest PFF grade in 2021 with a 91.6 grade as a true freshman, as well as having the third highest grade last year at a 90 overall grade as a sophomore. This is a guy that, as long as he keeps showing the signs that he has in his first 2 years, is going to be a first-round NFL draft pick, is probably going to go in the top 20 of the NFL draft, and figures to be a, I don't want to use this term all the time, but a target-munching tight end one option for whatever team takes him. Think of, for example, some of the contenders this year that prioritized taking a tight end. Cowboys took a tight end. Bills took a tight end. People are starting to realize that having this consistent, dynamic tight end option in your receiving profile when you're trying to compete for Super Bowls, people are trying to copy what the Kansas City Chiefs has done. And realistically, out of all the prospects, I think Brock Bowers is really the only one that you can kind of make the case for having a Travis Kelce level usage in the NFL.
Yeah, I mean, he kind of did what like Travion Henderson did as a freshman, except kept doing it for like two more years after that. Like, he's going to be another great tight end option in college football this year, and going to be the go-to guy for the Georgia Bulldogs. And he literally posted like an elite PFF receiving grade, elite numbers as a freshman, elite PFF receiving grade, elite numbers as a sophomore, like top 3 in the country both years. He's just going to do it again this year and probably be a first-round NFL draft pick, maybe even a top 10 NFL draft pick. And I'm sure a lot of people are really going to be high on Brock Bowers. Again, he plays tight end, which is why I have him down a little bit, because we've seen, most tight ends not develop right away. Even a guy like Kyle Pitts is probably taking a little bit longer to develop than people expected from him coming out of Florida. So that's kind of the only reason I have Bowers a little bit lower. We can go on to the next guy. Go ahead.
I just want to say one thing. It's still ridiculous how, as a true freshman, this was a guy who had 14 touchdowns from scrimmage and nearly 900 receiving yards on almost 16 yards per reception as a tight end. I just want to point that out because that's freaky. I'll let you go into your pick, though.
Yeah, well, I mean, on a national championship winning team, too. Yeah. Not only did he start as a freshman, he was literally the most productive player on that team with a second-round receiver to compete for targets with in George Pickens. So Emeka Egbuka is my pick here. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 2, most likely in next year's class. They're probably both going to come from Ohio State. Harrison being obviously the transcendent prospect, but Egbuka being a very good one in his own right. 6'1", 203 pounds, ran low 4.4s coming out of high school, commanded 1,151 yards and 10 touchdowns across from Marvin Harrison, which is pretty insane. 25% target share as well. And, ranked as a top 20 receiver in PFF receiving grade last year. So I think Egbuka is a guy that I'm going to be really excited about, because I don't view him as a guy that has many flaws. As long as he's the size he's listed at and runs what he's expected to, he's going to be a very productive receiver playing at a big school against high-level competition. And yeah, he wasn't the number 1 on his team, but he could absolutely be the number 1 on his NFL team. Just because he's playing across from Marvin Harrison in college doesn't mean he can't be the number 1 receiver for whatever NFL team he goes to. And I think the NFL is really going to like him too. I think he's going to be a top 15 pick in the draft.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because, I mean, we saw the exact same case happen only in 2022 where, he's only the wide receiver 2 on Ohio State. Do we think he's going to be a wide receiver 1 in the NFL? And then it just so happened that Chris Olave is now valued as a top 10 wide receiver in Dynasty after nearly 1,100 yards as a rookie. Emeka Egbuka kind of has that feeling to him where, he's the wide receiver 2 to Marvin Harrison. But that doesn't mean you should discount what his ceiling is at the next level. Like you kind of said, has the athleticism, has the receiving market share, 25% target share across from Marvin Harrison. It's absolutely ridiculous. So I agree with you there. Emeka Egbuka, good pick there. Quentin Johnson is going to be my pick at 203, wide receiver, newly drafted of the Los Angeles Chargers, I believe 21st overall pick this year. And I mean, we're not going to go too in depth with the 2023 guys, but you guys know our thoughts on Quentin Johnson. Ceiling absolutely there. Big frame wide receiver, yards after catch out of the wazoo. Now gets paired in an offense with Justin Herbert that can flirt with 700, 750 pass attempts this year.
Yeah, he's definitely a good option. You could have argued him over either of the last 2 guys that we talked about as well. I'm going to go at 204 here with Malik Neighbors, who is a bit of a projection, but he did outproduce Kayshon Boutte at LSU this past year as a sophomore. had 1,000 yards and only 3 touchdowns. But a 21% target share as a sophomore is definitely something he can build upon. Also, one of these guys that kind of checks boxes, 6'1", 188 pounds, ran a 4.47 at a high school. So it looks like, he's got the size, got the speed to be able to, translate to the next level. Definitely a big time breakout candidate. He could look stupid at this point. I'm not going to lie. He could just fall out of favor completely. And we'd be like, oh my God, I can't believe I took Malik Neighbors over Zay Flowers or something like that. But at the same time, if he breaks out, he has a 29% target share this year, 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns. It wouldn't shock me whatsoever. And he has a real case to still be the wide receiver 2 in next year's class behind Marvin Harrison.
Yep. No, I agree with you there. I think that's a fine pick as well. My pick at 205 is going to be another 2024 guy. And I've talked a lot about Ohio State players. As a Michigan fan, I had to represent one of my Go Blue representatives, Donovan Edwards, going here. Yes, the running back 1 from Michigan. People are going to be, arguing, is it going to be Corum? Is it going to be Edwards? I personally think that Edwards is going to be viewed better in an NFL light. And the reason being with what his skill set kind of represents with the new NFL. A space back that is absolutely dynamic when he has an open lane, can contribute like an absolute elite receiving back when he's trusted with that full workload. And we saw it at the end of last year. Once Corum went down, this is a guy that was averaging, 25 plus touches per game down the stretch last year, put up over 250, I believe, yards from scrimmage against Ohio State. I believe he had like 215 rushing yards in that game on 22 carries. So we're looking at a dynamic running back playing for a blue-collar team that's going to be up there in terms of rushing this year with Michigan, going to be a top 4 overall type of team in college football. I would not be shocked if that workload he saw last year, he builds off of it. He establishes himself as the clear-cut running back 1 at Michigan and gets drafted in the top 40 of next year. I can tell you right now, if that ceiling range of outcomes does materialize, I think 205, when it's all said and done, may look silly for the level of talent that Donovan Edwards represents. 5-star coming out of high school, I believe only Travion Henderson and Will Shipley were ranked higher in his recruiting class. This guy's the real deal.
Yeah, I mean, I worry about him a little bit from a size perspective because he's listed like 6 foot, 6'1", 204 pounds, and ran like a 4.45 or 4.55, sorry, coming out of high school. So size, speed, athleticism kind of worries me a little for Donovan Edwards. But I mean, a 7% target share as a freshman and a 7.3% target share as a sophomore is no joke, especially playing alongside an NFL caliber running back in Blake Corum. So I definitely like that pick there. 206, I'll go back to the 2023 class with Zay Flowers. A lot of people aren't high on the landing spot, but he was a first-round receiver. And he's in a place where if he is a good receiver, he can command targets because Bateman and Odell Beckham, while they're solid, are not necessarily guys that scare me off of Zay Flowers if he hits his ceiling. And a lot of people think his ceiling can be like a Steve Smith or something like that. My comp for him is Christian Kirk. If you drop Christian Kirk in the Baltimore Ravens offense right now, I think we'd be excited to draft Christian Kirk. He'd be the go-to guy for Lamar Jackson, and Zay Flowers can become that for sure. So I'll throw it back to you with 207. You've talked like probably 30 times about Michigan and Ohio State. Now you get to go to my team and pick a player from Texas.
Welcome. Yeah, won't be the only Texas representative on this list. Xavier Worthy, after his freshman season, everybody was claiming this guy as the clear-cut wide receiver 1 in the 2024 class. Obviously, that was before, Marvin Harrison ended up proving to be generational. Mecca Buka ended up having a good season, obviously, before Xavier Worthy kind of had that down sophomore season. From a pure, comparison standpoint, if he hits the ceiling, like, we're looking at a Devontae Smith type of player, separator on the outside, can command targets. The only real concern about him is the frame and obviously the inconsistencies he showed in 2022. But I'm more willing to forgive the inconsistencies in 2022. Obviously, Quinn Ewers wasn't really impressing, to say the least. I'm really not overweighing the 2022 output from Xavier Worthy because what we saw from his first year kind of shows me exactly what he can be at the next level. Obviously, I'm not going to let this be a Kayshon Boutte situation. If he has a bad third year and he doesn't improve from last year, I have no problem dropping him down. But I think the risk reward at this point of the combined draft, I mean, this is still a guy I think that when it's all said and done can still be a top 6 overall pick in 2024 if he hits his ceiling. So as a result, I do think in the mid-second of the combined classes is a fair appropriation of his value.
Yeah, I mean, he's listed at 164 pounds. So, like, that's going to be a problem. We're going to have the same Jordan Addison, Devontae Smith discussions about Xavier Worthy next year. But he did command a 30% target share his freshman year, which is insane, and 12 touchdowns his freshman year. And even in a down season this year, 29% target share is still a good underlying peripheral. He ran 4.29 coming out of high school. So, unlike Addison and unlike Smith, he has elite speed as well as, route running ability and that kind of thing. So, Worthy's definitely a wild card. He could become, the second best receiver in this class, or he could be outside the top 6. It doesn't really compute his range of outcomes, to be honest, because he has so many things that could go against him or going for him. I'm going to go at 208 with a guy from 2023. I thought Zach Charbonnet was an excellent prospect. I know it's a bad landing spot in Seattle. He probably would have gone off the board way before this if he went to like any other team, but he got second round draft capital. I don't exactly know how it's going to play out with Kenneth Walker there, but if they turn into one of the best young backfields in the league, I still want a piece of Zach Charbonnet because he is still one of the better prospects that I've seen over the last couple of years at running back. Great receiving profile, good size, all that good stuff. So Charbonnet to me still deserves to go in the top 2 rounds of this one. And you are on the board here at 209. It looks like you're going back to the running back pool as well.
Yeah, and this is a guy I have more concerns with. Hence, obviously, I picked Donovan Edwards over him because according to the Dynasty community, according to the Devy community, this is a guy that's held in very, very high light. Braylon Allen of Wisconsin. The concerns that I have for him is he just like too big? Like, does he have enough juice at the next level? Does he have enough receiving ability at the next level to be a consistent running back one from a ceiling perspective? I'm not sure. Or is it more so, this between the tackles, big time grounder that can maybe rush in 10 to 12 touchdowns and be a running back too? I don't really know how to evaluate the ceiling of Braylon Allen. Obviously, I mean, that feels crazy to say. We're talking about a guy that's going to be drafted, and I believe he won't even be 21 by the time he's drafted into the NFL. That is how young he is. But I mean, for a 6'2", 240-pound back, he's not Raheem Sanders. Raheem Sanders went out there and commanded a receiving profile. Braylon Allen has 21 receptions across his first 2 years, despite what? 500 touches in that stretch? 450 touches in that stretch? It does concern me, the fact that he hasn't commanded any single role on third down. And like I kind of said, the rushing efficiency just absolutely fell off a cliff this year. Looking at 6.8 yards per tote as a freshman, 5.4 yards per tote as a sophomore. Albeit that was always going to be expected because of increased workload. But it is a concern that you're knocking off basically 1.5 yards per carry from what Braylon Allen was doing as a true freshman. And we saw last year going into the season, everybody had high expectations, maybe thinking this could be the next Jonathan Taylor for Wisconsin. Obviously, bigger backs that didn't really have receiving profiles, but were going to be elite pure runners. I don't know if he even has, second round pick in the NFL draft level ceiling.
Yeah, he's tough, man, because like you said, he's going to be like legit 20.2 years old when he's drafted. Yeah. He's going to be extremely young. He was like 17 his freshman season or something like that. And he's 6'2", 240 pounds. But like you said, is that too big? He ran a 4.8 coming out of high school. Like, he's not that fast. He's not Jonathan Taylor's speed. He's not Derrick Henry's speed for their size. He would probably need to slim down a little bit, in my opinion, to make sure that he's a little bit faster and a little bit more explosive. But yeah, I mean, 1,250 rushing yards on Wisconsin's offense. It seems like 2 seasons of that. It seems decent, but like, they run the ball like crazy. He probably should have been more productive. Like, Taylor ran for like 2,000 yards, like 3 straight years in that offense. So yeah, Braylon Allen, a guy I have a lot more questions about than I think a lot of people as well, because, he seems to me like just a hammer. He doesn't seem like a dynamic hammer like Jonathan Taylor was, or like Derrick Henry is, or anything like that. He seems kind of more, Brian Robinson in a bigger body.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and people are going to throw around, obviously, like I mentioned, the short branch is going to be Jonathan Taylor because of the college scouting. They're going to see Wisconsin on the freaking helmet, and they're going to obviously attribute that to Jonathan Taylor. But I think people were actually calling him, like you said, Derrick Henry coming last year, and just the efficiency as a rusher doesn't even hold a candle to what Derrick Henry was doing.
Yeah, unless he has some great season this year, breaks out and looks a lot more explosive. I think he has that potential. Like, if he wins the Heisman Trophy this year, then he has maybe Derrick Henry type of ceiling. But I don't think that's likely based on what he put out in the first 2 years of his career. At 210, I made like a little bit of a pivot here because I was going to go with Jatavion Sanders from Texas, who's the second tight end in next year's class. But following the logic that we had earlier on in the draft, I think I'm going to go Dalton Kincaid, knowing that he went as a first-round tight end to the Buffalo Bills, which is like one of the 99th percentile range of outcomes that we could ever imagine for any tight end coming out of college. And Dalton Kincaid had a great receiving profile, led the country in PFF receiving grade last year. So I think it would be hypocritical for me to take Jatavion Sanders over him because he's an unknown. He hasn't even really produced much yet. I like him to break out this year, but I don't think he's necessarily even going to be a first round or a second round tight end lock. Like he could be, but it's not necessarily a guarantee. So I'll just take the guy who already went in the first round to the Buffalo Bills and Dalton Kincaid. And even though I personally valued Michael Mayer higher pre-draft, the market values Kincaid a lot higher. And I think, the more I think about it, I should probably be in line with that because, it matters what the market thinks, right? You got to know liquidity and tradability and, value insulation. If Dalton Kincaid is a bad season this year and Michael Mayer is a bad season this year, one of them is going to fall a lot further than the other in dynasty rankings. And same goes for if they both have great seasons this year, Kincaid might be the dynasty tight end too after this year if he has a great season.
Yeah, no, I agree. Again, if I, couldn't trade out or couldn't trade down, I would still prefer Mayer. But like you kind of said, that you do have to consider, especially if you're diversifying as well. If you're in multiple leagues and although you have Mayer higher, like just take stabs at both. Because like you kind of said, Kincaid probably holds more value in terms of the dynasty market, given the landing spot, given the draft capital, given kind of what people are envisioning him being. People are talking about him being obviously the Travis Kelce of the Bills offense because the Bills have seen how successful Kansas City has been. Kind of want to implement that type of style player. And I mean, outside of Stephon Diggs, he can absolutely walk into a role as the second receiver on that team. So yeah, I'd agree. I would say the dynasty market does value Kincaid over Mayer, although I would personally disagree. We can move on to the next pick though. And another player from this past draft class fell out of the first round to a lot of people's shock. I mean, this was a guy that was minus 500 to be a top 5 overall pick on draft day. So him falling to 33rd overall to the Tennessee Titans, who traded up for him, was a big shock. And obviously I'm talking about Will Levis, quarterback, formerly of Kentucky, going to the Tennessee Titans there. Like I said, 33rd overall pick in the NFL draft. And I mean, everything we've kind of cited coming into the process still exists for Will Levis. Big time arm talent, obviously an older prospect, struggled in terms of his big time throw versus turnover worthy play rate, which you went into a lot in his tail of the tape. And obviously him going 33rd overall instead of top 10 is going to hamper his profile. But I still think everything he represents from an upside standpoint, from a value accrual standpoint, if he hits his ceiling on the market, is still intact. And as a result, I do think if we're combining the draft classes, he's personally my 110 in this year's class. So therefore, I think he has to be involved within the first 2 rounds of the combined mock.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people might be wondering, where's Quinn Ewers, where's JJ McCarthy, where's KJ Jefferson, where's Shadir Sanders, like any quarterback in next year's class. It is complete and utter question marks after Drake May and Caleb Williams, to the point that I don't even want to attempt to say which quarterback I think is going to break out. I think what you need to do if you're buying 2024 picks and hoping for a quarterback to be one of those picks, if it's not an early pick, I would not even count it as a quarterback, because it's way more likely that no other quarterbacks emerge from the 2024 class alongside Caleb Williams and Drake May than it is that 2 or 3 quarterbacks emerge, or even one more quarterback emerges. And there's no real consensus on any of these guys. The NFL draft community prefers Michael Penix Jr., who's like 24 years old. I prefer, KJ Jefferson. Some people prefer Quinn Ewers. Like, it's all over the place at this point. So yeah, Will Levis, to me, if he was in next year's class, like if we just put his exact profile in next year's class, he'd probably be the quarterback 3, at least as it stands right now.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that point on Penix. He's literally going to be basically 24 the week after the draft. He's actually just about my age, oddly enough. He's a similar case, quote unquote, to what Will Levis represented this year. Only he doesn't have nearly the tools that Levis does to make people want to take him high in the draft. So, yeah, although he's valued as a quarterback 3 right now, I feel like once people kind of break him down a little bit, he's more so maybe a 3rd round type of pick, Desmond Ridder type of pick. You know what I mean? So we can go on to the next pick, though. And who do you got at 212?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going with the other tight end, Michael Mayer, tight end of the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, again, I could have argued Jatavion Sanders from Texas, but I think I'm just going to go with the known commodity and Michael Mayer, who is one of the best tight end prospects that we've ever seen, realistically. In the last 10 years, Pitts obviously is the best tight end prospect. Bowers is probably second best, and Michael Mayer's right behind those guys at 3. So I think Mayer was a better prospect than Kincaid. I personally would rather have him than Kincaid in Dynasty, but I don't have to make that decision knowing that Kincaid goes ahead. And speaking of that, we want to introduce a new segment at the end of this video, basically comment of the day. So if you guys want to be involved in the show, leave as many comments down below as you want. We are really, really pushing that because it is part of the new YouTube algorithm to get a lot of comments, a lot of engagement. So If you have any comments, feel free to leave them down below. We will answer you. And also, you might be featured at the end of one of our videos. And this question that you guys can see is the question of the day to close out this video. Basically, Equipto says, would it be crazy to take Mayer over Kincaid in a superflex rookie draft at 111? And as we kind of already talked about, yes, it would be, because the market doesn't value Mayer over Kincaid. Even if you value Mayer over Kincaid like we do, you should trade down to 201, trade down to 202, let somebody come up for Dalton Kincaid, and then take Michael Mayer at that point, pocket a 2025 second. Even if it's something small, it's better than taking the guy over what the market would take, because there's no reason to do that. You're just sacrificing value on the open market.
Yeah, and I talked about exploiting market value on a recent video, but that is a prime example. And coming into the cycle, I thought that they would be maybe like flip-flopped who goes first in most rookie drafts. But I will say, out of the 6-7 rookie drafts I've done, I don't even know if I can recall Kincaid going after Mayer in a single one of them. Although we would prefer Mayer, it seems pretty clear that the market kind of has Kincaid at that 109, 110 type of value. I've seen drafts where he's went over Zay Flowers versus Mayer, sometimes falling to like the 206, 207. I've seen it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the question of the day. Again, leave all your questions down below. If you have a good one, we'll definitely feature you on a video. A couple honorable mentions at the end of this. I talked about all the quarterbacks already.
Yep.
KJ Jefferson, Quinn Ewers, JJ McCarthy from Michigan, there's a bunch of guys like the Shadur Sanders from Colorado. There's a bunch of dudes, Michael Penix from Washington. There's guys that could emerge, but we're not going to count our eggs before they hatch, kind of thing. And also Jatavion Sanders, tight end from Texas. There's a couple other running backs that we could have talked about as well. Trey Benson from Florida State's interesting. Blake Corum from Michigan, who we talked about Donovan Edwards, but not him. Will Shipley from Clemson. There's a number of guys that definitely could have gone in this draft, but these are the 2 rounds combined, 2023 and 2024. You guys will notice that we have actually more 2023 players than we do have of 2024. As I kind of discussed in that, is 2024 picks overrated video, I talked about the fact that I think I'm a little bit worried about the depth at the end of the first round, just like we've seen this year, where, Will Levis, Zach Charbonnet, these guys, we're not totally excited to draft them at the end of the first round the way we were last year coming into the season about the late 2023 first round picks. And I think the same is true potentially for 2024. Some guys could emerge, but it's no guarantee. It could be just like this year.
Yep. No, fully agree. You basically hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, for sure. So subscribe, comment any of your thoughts down below. Check out flockfantasy.com for all of our rookie rankings, dynasty rankings, all that good stuff. First priority on dynasty decisions videos as well. We'll probably have another one of those in the next coming days. But yeah, with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.